All right. So I want to do another video on the subject matter of collapse. Last time I did a bit of a long video talking about the history, the timeline of collapse over the last 50 years and some of the high points of things that have transpired during that time period. Some stuff that most people have never heard about, and certainly no one's going to any great length to advertise. Now I want to talk about in this video is I want to talk about two things. Number one, really where are we and what can we kind of expect as a strategy going forward? You know, it's one of those problems with disasters is that if there's a disaster coming, people are always going to downplay it because they don't want you to panic. Trump just recently was saying, I'm downplaying the coronavirus because I don't want people to panic. I like to downplay it. I still like to downplay it. I think it's important to keep people from panicking. And so I downplay it. Well, however you choose to think about that, fine, whatever. That's a perfectly normal attitude for authorities to take. Is that their greatest concern is people panicking, and quite frankly, they unanimously have no grip on disaster information. And it's kind of interesting is that you can kind of tell a lot about people by what they choose not to know about. There's a lot of things the information that's missing, the things you can't say, the things you're not supposed to study, the things you can't get funded, the things you're not allowed to look at, the things that will get SWAT teams showing up at your door at 3 a.m. to pull you out and make you go away somewhere. These things that they tell you a lot. I kind of refer to it as intellectual negative space. And negative space being the artistic term for the space surrounding an object, and we may get into that at some point. But basically, there's all this information that people either don't look at or you're not supposed to look at, and in many ways, that what's in that nether world of the unstudied tells you a lot about things. And in our society, one of the things that's in the intellectual negative space that surrounds us is anything having to do with how people respond to disaster, any sort of crisis thinking. We're really extremely weak from the political level on down on any kind of level of crisis thinking. The only people who really have a grip on it are the military. And maybe a few more than the more clever financial people and so on, investors and so on, have a grip on crisis thinking to some degree. But it's really not an issue that's studied. It is really not an issue that anyone cares about. There's a lot of, therefore, assumptions and superstitions about how people respond in a disaster that are completely untrue. And yet our culture believes that these untrue things are, in fact, the absolute truth. And this goes to the whole idea that politicians, we cannot possibly tell the truth. We cannot possibly warn people about what's actually happening. They will panic. And to a large degree, what they mean by panic is either they won't listen, they won't remain organized under our power, which isn't the same as panic, or you'll act self-interestedly and cause trouble for them, which again is not panic. It may or may not be helpful. It may or may not be, it may cause greater disaster than might otherwise manifest, but or not. But the thing is, it just makes trouble for them, so they prefer you not to do it. So that's the thing, is that it always will justify. It's like, we underplay these phenomena because we don't want to engender panic, and quite frankly, they have no idea what the hell they're talking about. Not that I'm some super expert on disasters. I have chosen to look into and investigate disaster and disaster psychology. What there is to be found, like I said, it's an intellectual dark space. It's an intellectual negative space that is in the nether regions around what is the approved knowledge of society. So really nobody knows a hell of a lot about it. Even those people who do take an interest don't know a hell of a lot about it. But it's something that has caught my interest, and it's something I have looked into. And so, the politicians will continue to see this thing. Oh, people will panic, people will panic, people will panic. And they'll keep telling themselves this lie as an excuse for why they cannot admit to you that they screwed up, that everything they've told you is a lie. Both sides, Democrats, Republicans, the whole thing, everything they told you is a lie. They'd have to come out and admit all these levels of shenanigans that they've pulled and all this level of criminality they've pulled and so on. They're simply not going to do it. So it's very important, just like I did in the last video, to know what the timeline is. That number one, this way, I explained last time that, the way we structure our society, we go for the greatest return to the greatest number of people in the shortest time possible, which is a very typical animal way of approaching things. And that has a parabolic growth curve, which is to say, it starts out and then it goes up to a peak. It cannot maintain infinite growth and it collapses. And that is typical of every animal species on the planet. And of course, the sad part of it is collapse is guaranteed. Timing is not guaranteed, but the collapse itself is guaranteed. And we've come close to a collapse any number of times where there's resources started to run out. Many times we've run into agricultural limits. And then we, discovered fertilizer. Well, that extended the amount of food we could grow, and so it extended the population. And then just about the time fertilizer was having its maximal effects on agriculture, people invented the tractor. And well, that increased the amount of agriculture that could be done. And then people discovered, oh, well, there's all these chemicals, fungicides, pesticides, herbicides, things like that. And that increased things for a while. And then that started to peter out. And then they said, well, maybe we could gene splice plants such that they were resistant to these chemicals, and then we could apply them much more easily and much more liberally. Or we could make plants grow in cold regions where they don't normally grow, or other things like that. So you have the GMO type revolution and the super chemicals that are used in agriculture to beat back the bugs, because the bugs keep getting stronger, weeds keep getting stronger, funguses keep getting stronger, and the more you poison them, the more you get a selective process for the stronger pests. And we've now reached the point where, barring some other major innovation in food, we have passed, back in 1999, we passed the peak of food, is dwindling off. Very much within the food industry, people are pretty much every year wondering, is this the year where the bugs, the plant, or the weeds will win? Is this the year that, there's a catastrophic failure of food supply? And of course, there's environmental issues that go into that too, and there's all kinds of other things that go into that. Fresh water, soil salinization, soil loss through erosion, through wind erosion, through water erosion, nutrients loss, demineralization, of all kinds of different things that go into the peril of agriculture. And so we've had this thing, is back even to the 1800s, we keep hitting the collapse point, and somebody came up with something clever that just played it out a little bit longer. And the same thing with, with different things like energy, is like wood. Burning wood reached kind of its zenith, and then they found natural gas, and they found coal. And so then coal and coal tar and coal oil, and natural gas, gas lights, stuff like that. And then they discovered oil, and that took us up for a long, long run. And now we're reaching where, we're kind of fidgeting with it. China is trying to get like deep sea methane crystals, which they have successfully brought up from the ocean bottoms for the first time intact. And so they're looking at, mining hydrates on the moon surface, hydrogen source of energy. Things like this. China is desperate to have a moon base within the next, whatever it is, 3-5 years, because they want to mine energy resources on the moon. You don't do that if there's cheap energy available. So all the theories that there's abundant cheap energy available, not so much. People are going to incredible lengths to find new energy sources. People are desperate. So that definitely tells you that no matter what we don't know what the truth is, but we know that there's not as much as they'd like us to believe. So every time we hit one of these transition points, we're come very close to collapse. This particular moment in time, of course, we're kind of getting a whole bunch of different things going on, where we have reached kind of the end cycle of a whole bunch of different things that would point to some sort of disruption, like the failure of the dollar. Those sorts of currencies fail every about 70 years. And it's been about 70 years since we went off the gold standard, at least as far as the populace was concerned. And so we've been entirely on the Fed Reserve note for approximately 70 years. That's when a dollar tends to collapse anyways. Normally, yes, it causes a recession. Yes, it causes a lost generation. You know, it takes 10 to 20 years to recover from that sort of thing. But you bounce back and you come up with a new currency and you roll forward. Uh, so that's not the collapse of civilization. It's just a big pain in the ass. Um, Equally, you could say, well, the political thing is like we're reaching the end of this, this political dysfunction and so on, which kind of is typical every 250 years in a republic. And this is the collapse of the republic, and that's going to change the whole structure of how the world works. But at the same time, even if America fell into some sort of a tyranny, that would be bad, but it wouldn't be the end of the world. It wouldn't be the collapse of all civilization. It would just be, a bad time for people who enjoy freedom. And then you could say, well, these energy, this food thing, maybe we'll just find new ways to do food. Maybe we'll find, new food sources. People want everyone to start eating bugs, and people want to start finding other things to make up the difference as the coral reefs die, as the fish populations crash, and so on. It's like, well, maybe we should start eating bugs. All these different things, and again, these don't measure up to the collapse of civilization or society in and of themselves. They mean a major change in lifestyle, a major change in culture, a major change in how people live and what they expect out of life. But now we have them all coming out at the same time, those and many others. And when you put all those together, suddenly the things where it's like, well, if the dollar stopped being the dollar, maybe the yuan becomes the currency, the default currency, or maybe we come up with some electronic currency or a cryptocurrency or something like that, and we roll on. And that's not really happening. That people want it to happen, but it's not really happening. And in fact, they're not putting the effort into it that's needed. People need to get their, if they really want to switch to an electronic currency, it's like so many things. The elitists, their attitude is, we'll just give people no choice. This will be the choice, and you're going to just have to adapt to it. And that's not how people are. People take time to adapt. In many cases, it takes a whole generation. So you get the kids who are growing up with it, and it's a common idea to them from their youngest years, and they're comfortable with it. So you have 10 years to 20 years to make a transition in thinking, where the old people die out who only knew the old way, and the new people come on who know the new way and are perfectly comfortable with it, and that's the transition. And the thing is, we don't have 20 years. So if, like, right now they really wanted to transition us to electronic currency or whatever, they'd really have to be hammering it and selling it and really pitching it to the kids, and making the kids super comfortable with current electric currency, so that 10 to 20 years from now, people would actually adopt electric currency without any problem. But it's very questionable. Do we have 10 to 20 years? So I wanted to kind of, some of the things I was saying in the last video made me think of something, and I wanted to kind of say, where are we in this? What are we looking at as far as how bad is this collapse going to be? Despite what anyone's going to tell you about how great things are going to be, again, they're going to lie. And then I want to talk about, the 12 things that the perils of collapse that nobody really tells you about and people don't really think about. Some of the stuff that's missed, stuff that you can really do something about. You can start to either train to deal with right now, or there's simple fixes that can get around it, or they represent hazards where if you know about it and you're practicing good discipline to keep yourself out of trouble, maybe your neighbor's not. And that's a really clear and present danger. And maybe you want to move, or maybe you want to educate your neighbor about, hey, these are bad practices. Because already people are finding that they're, being forced out of their homes. They're going into living in tents. They're going into homelessness, living in their cars, living in the vans and stuff like that. And you've got very civified, civilized people being pitched into a much more rustic, rural interaction with nature, kind of existence. And the vast majority of them have no clue how to do that. They have no clue what the dangers even are. I mean, there's very simple dangers that everyone thinks about. Somebody's going to attack you. They're going to try to mug you. They're going to try to steal your stuff. They're whatever. You're going to have really work hard to get something to eat. Oh, well, you're going to have to worry about potable water. All these things. Those are common stuff. Everyone knows about that. I want to talk about 12 things that you may not have really thought about and that are really serious dangers, probably as serious or more serious than a lot of the common dangers you do think about. And what are some of the things you can do about them? So, going off this 5 stages of collapse, what we're talking about there is, what's in the book? Well, we got, Dmitry Orlov postulated, how the Soviet Union collapses. First, they saw trouble in their financial world and the financial area collapsed. Then they started to see that spill over into the commercial manufacturing, what was on the shelves during stores, and that started to collapse. Then they had political collapse where basically nothing could be done politically. The whole political system failed to work. And at that point, Soviet Union was able to stop their collapse, reformulate a new government, and bring themselves back up. And so their collapse was not a complete and total collapse because they never truly and completely passed the political phase, though they got very, very close to going down to level 4, which is, things like organized crime and so on, is there is no real government left over. There's organized crime. So the thing is here is that, like I said, is in previous videos, in October of 2019, we hit an impasse in the financial world where there simply was, they needed less demand for credit. Because that's the thing, is that if you have demand for credit, credit does this funny thing where the more people who are bidding on it, the more the interest rate goes up. So the more demand there is for credit, the more people are willing to bid up credit or to try to obtain credit, the higher the interest rates go. So it's not the price go. It is the price in a way. The interest rates represents a future price as opposed to a current price. But if there's a lot of people chasing credit and there's not a lot of money to be had, then it forces up interest rates. And so we got into a point where they dropped interest rates to 0 and in some cases below 0, which really shouldn't be possible. And still there was demand for credit, and in fact there was even more demand for credit because, of course, it's cheap credit. If you can get free money, 0% interest is essentially free money. Why would you not borrow to infinity? There's a whole thing that's called the carry trade. And what they do is when somebody has very low interest rates, we saw this with Japan. As Japan had the yen kind of collapsed, and they had this 10-year lost generation. And one of the things they did was they dropped interest rates to 0 just to get some sort of an economic activity going. And people all over the world, big corporations and everything, went to Japan and they said, we'd love to borrow as much money as you want to give us at 0% interest. And what they would do is then they just put the money into bonds, whatever they were, Japanese bonds, American bonds, whoever bonds. And the bonds were returning something like 1%, 3%, something like that. But the money was free. So you could get free 3% interest. And you didn't have, all you had to do is go in and say, I've got such and such number of assets. Could you loan me a few $1,000,000? Yeah, sure. Here's a few $1,000,000 at 0% interest. Okay, great. I'm going to go buy $1,000,000 of bonds. And now I come back and I say, well, I've got $1,000,000 more in assets. Can I borrow another $1,000,000? And I say, yeah, sure, no problem. 0% interest rate. And I go buy another $1,000,000 worth of bonds. And then the interest on those bonds was free money. That was money I could just put in my pocket because if they ever called the loan back, I'd just sell my bonds and give them the money back because it was 0% interest. I didn't owe them any more than they initially gave me. And so this did stimulate the economy, but they created this really fragile system where if they started to raise the interest rates, all of a sudden all these people would liquidate billions and billions of dollars worth of bonds, causing all kinds of trouble for all kinds of countries, having all the bonds sell off and nowhere to go really quick, no money chasing them. And then, these people would have to, push this money back into the system, and it would actually facilitate another collapse. And so as the United States drops its interest rates to 0, we have this whole carry trade thing kind of developing here too, where all these people want to borrow all the money they can possibly borrow. This drives up the interest rates. You drive up the interest rates, though, and the banks have all this sort of assets too, where if the interest rates go up, it forces people to liquidate these assets that are underperforming assets. And if they do that, the banks are left holding the bag. They can't possibly cover the exposure that they have. And in fact, actually, rumors to the tunes of over $400 quadrillion in debt from strange and underperforming assets out there. So, hypothecated assets, the things that people just made up in the back room and exchanged with each other. And $400 quadrillion. Yeah, it's 400,000 trillion dollars of these outstanding debts. And there's no way in the world. There's not enough of anything on this planet to ever possibly cover that kind of debt. And so if it all gets called and it all comes crashing in on the economy, it would absolutely devastate the entire system. So, the only thing you can do once you have that is that the only thing you can possibly do is drop demand. You can either do one thing. You can create a infinity money supply, print money to infinity. You can try to do that, and you'll fail because you can't do anything to infinity. We live in a finite system. You can only make the money so fast. You can only distribute it so fast. You can only spend it so fast. So even trying to print money to infinity, you cannot make up for infinite credit demand, even printing as fast as you can. And the other possible option is to basically destroy demand. And destroy demand actually basically means destroy businesses, destroy people's lives, destroy people's homes, and everything they'd ever hoped for. Stop them from taking credit. Sacrifice individual people and their lives and livelihoods in exchange for, that just take them out of the game, up to and including death. We've reached a point where either the big corporations and the big banks can continue playing and making all kinds of money and consolidating the money into fewer and fewer hands with the expense that people die. Or the whole system can collapse. And they've just basically chosen with the, at least the current system, that's part of the argument that's going on right now is, Trump would have us print money to infinity as much as we can. The Democrats would have us destroy demand, lock down the economy, lock down people, put people into permanent quarantine, and only if your social credit standing was high enough are you allowed out of your house, and you're allowed to eat, and you're allowed to work, and so on. And otherwise, you're left locked in your house, and of course, 30 days later, you're not a problem anymore. You're dead. And then that has destroyed demand. You're not putting anything on your credit card anymore. You don't have a mortgage anymore. You don't have a car loan anymore. There's less demand for credit because 30 days later, after you get locked into your house with no food, you die. You starve to death. And suddenly, hey, there's less demand. We have created demand destruction. And so that is that's the globalist way of doing things, is to destroy demand. Trump's approach is print to infinity. Thing is that neither one works. You can only kill off so many people before you destroy population anyway. You can kill off, according to the actuarials, about 40% of the population, and beyond that, society just can't even support itself. So they can start destroying businesses, and they can start, destroying people's lives and rendering them homeless and starving them to death and killing them off intentionally through one means or another. They can do that, but they can only take it up so far before that approach won't work anymore. They'll reach a point where they just can't follow that path anymore, no matter what, which would be about 40% of the population. And then they would have to come up with something else. Either they have to face collapse, or they'd have to come up with some other plan. So we're at that point now where, we are paying for the continuation of society with our blood. Or we have to print to infinity and basically socialize. The government just has to do what's called helicopter money, is just throw money out to the populace, trying to get towards infinity as long as they can. Leave everything intact, but try to go towards infinity as fast as they can. the one thing that that is not going to happen is a return to normal and prosperity and happiness for everyone. That just isn't in the cards. This basically means that financial collapse, that's absolutely a foregone conclusion. We are in it now. And that's why I've been saying since January, hey, look, they're just going to have to print money and they're going to hand it out. There's going to have to be additional stimulus packages. They're going to have to do the guaranteed income. They're going to have to keep printing money and handing out to infinity. And the less they can do this, the less effectively they can do this, the sooner collapse actually comes. Because you can't keep people in the system. People will fall out of the system, which creates the demand destruction, keeps things going for a little while. But at some point, there's all kinds of problems. With commercial collapse, we passed a point there where we have China shut down commerce, of course, when they went into quarantine. They are now making sounds of war with the United States and are basically saying there's whole asset classes that they're just not going to send us anymore. You'll notice that there are still very bare shelves, particularly in the food departments, but in all kinds of departments all across the board. And that's not coming back quickly. And it has been said by the people who do planning for society, kind of the socialists or the sociologists who plan societies, are saying we've got to transition where we've got to get manufacturing back into the U.S. or into India or into other countries. And a lot of effort was put in towards moving it to India. And of course, now suddenly there's a war between India and China popped up out of nowhere, which, depending on how it's prosecuted, may turn into a world war and certainly might put a kibosh on trying to move in manufacturing to India. But anyways, they got to move the manufacturing somewhere, and they're saying that it took 80 years to move it to China, and now they've got 20 years to move it somewhere anywhere else to try to keep things going. And if it takes longer than 20 years, they're screwed. It won't work. The whole thing will collapse if they can't do 80 years worth of work in 20 years, and they're trying to figure out how they can do 80 years of work in 20 years. So the commercial problem, that's already baked in the cake. That's only standing to get worse, especially if we go into a war, which is very likely. The political collapse, of course, we have right now. We've got a contested election, and both sides are talking about how the other side's illegitimate. Both sides are saying that the other side's cheating. Both sides are refusing to work with each other. Congress won't make laws. They won't come to the negotiating table. They hate Trump and everything like that. So we have a permanent dysfunctional political system. And so either we see the end of the Democratic Party, if the Democratic Party fails, one questions, what replaces them? What other opinion is out there? Because you don't want one party to have all the power because they get stupid power hungry. They can do anything. They can do everything. And they can quickly become very tyrannical and so forth. And of course, that is in many ways a collapse of the political structure. So if the Democrats were to lose, as some people speculate, that's not necessarily a positive thing. If the Republicans were to lose, the same thing, but even worse. The unfortunate thing is the progressive socialist agenda that's being pimped out by the Democrats. The end game of that is always genocide. It's been tried many, many times over the last 100 years to do the very things that they're talking about. It has always failed. It has always resulted in immeasurable suffering and the violation of human rights on every level. And the very people who are supporting this, homosexual people, transgender people, women, minority peoples of whatever race, they always suffer just as badly, if not considerably worse. So they think that they're going to get their own back, and they're being told, hey, get whitey or get men, get these horrible, evil white men, so on. We're going to get our revenge on them. And actually, the truth of the matter is, if you actually look at history, they're going to suffer far more so than the people that they are trying to target. Either way, we're at a point of political impasse, and this is the same point that Dmitry Orlov described of what happened. Political impasse, and that created political collapse within the Soviet Union. So right now, these are all baked in the cake, and we're going to see these kind of reach a culmination point here over certainly the next 2 months and further over into the next couple of years, where politically things are either going to get tyrannical or they're going to get genocidal. Possibly both. Or they're just going to fail to work. The politics, they just simply won't be able to promote their authority anymore, which is kind of what I'm suspecting is going to happen. Is at some point people just will not listen to the authorities anymore. And so that'll be the fall of politics. At the same time, we are seeing organized crime and vigilante groups and mutual health protection groups and protest groups and all kinds of stuff. Protest groups, defense groups. And that's forming now. We see that forming right now, and there's groups, things like the different biker gangs, the different drug gangs, and so on like that. That they're the ones who are trying to, they're coming into their own and potentially going to take over. Currently, none of them are structured in a way that's going to allow for survival. But like I said, kind of consider who might be your local, self-organizing collective, and think about, whose group do you want to be part of? I mean, this is ends up being a lot like prison, where you may not want to join the Black Panthers or the Aryan Brotherhood or the Hispanic gang or whatever, that's in that particular jail. But the fact of the matter, if you don't join somebody, everybody takes out after you, and your life is not going to be worth it for any length of time. And so you join, the race appropriate gang in jail, in prison, just as a matter of survival. You just do that. And that's going to be very much how society, if politics collapses, that's what society becomes. It's very much like what you see inside of a prison. That sort of social dynamic is what you see. We see it forming up right now. Now, like I said, I don't think too many of those groups are actually in a situation where they're likely to endure. Groups go through this weird evolution where the first leader is oftentimes a real psychopath, a real sociopath, of a strong man kind of image, the person who is very ruthless and aggressive and commands the most authority and is most willing to bring violence. And of course, either they end up getting assassinated or they end up getting killed because they're constantly trying to foment conflict where it might be wiser to make peace. They're not peacemakers. And so they foment violence and everything like that. And either they get killed in the violence or people turn against them because it's just they're asking too much. Too many people are dying and so on. And so anyways, whatever happens is the first leader gets deposed, and then the most popular person ascends to leadership, but the most popular person is trying to please everyone. And not only are they trying to please everyone, they're generally incompetent, and they get deposed because nobody can stand them anymore because they're a people pleaser. In many ways, think somebody like a Bill Clinton was a people pleaser type. And then the third person to come along usually is a more balanced individual, the person who makes things work, the person who actually has a clue and makes things work, tends to be the third person to ascend to some level of power. So as we're seeing these self-organizing collectives, I mean, this is understood about gangs. This is like gang psychology and how gangs function, and they go through this fairly predictable pattern. And so, you've got people saying, hey, we should be in a mutual neighborhood defense society or whatever, and the people who are going to raise to power in that are going to tend to be the most psychopathic people. The most aggressive, the most belligerent, the most obnoxious people are going to be the ones who tend to raise to power. And then it's going to be the most popular. And then finally, you might get somebody who's works. So like right now, these groups are primarily pretty psychopathic and not necessarily something you want to be a part of. And fairly dangerous, but you may have no choice but to become part of them. Those who survive, they're going to go through a whole dysfunctional period of until they finally get to somebody who can make things work. And then, of course, we're seeing right now tribes form up, extended families. Family. And people who are being forced to live with each other or who are providing mutual support for each other and so on. it's not clear how well that was going to work either, because the question is, will those families be able to access enough energy and resources to provide for everybody in the family? Whether that be through farming or gardening or hunting or fishing, or through some sort of a business that they run, or some sort of a black market criminal enterprise or something like that. And you can look to many traditional people, particularly like the wandering people, and how they've made things work. And so if those families that can make things work in that way, they'll be fine. They'll probably be fairly stable, provided they can get enough resources. And so that's going to be a really big question. So, collapse of the community is not guaranteed, but it is kind of hard at the moment. Is like, how many people are growing gardens? How many small farms are there? How much can hunting actually provide for people, which is not anywhere near enough. You know, the communities that tend to survive are going to be ocean adjacent communities, because they're going to look to fishing, small ship fishing, and possibly trade using small ships. And the families are then those families also who have that opportunity. They're going to tend to survive. Others are not going to do so well. So once we once we get to the crash point of the financial, once we get to the crash point of the political, all this, the rest of this stuff is pretty much baked in the cake. We're absolutely going to go through at least a partial political collapse, along with a commercial and financial collapse. It's already baked in the cake, already happening. We're already seeing. I mean, the thing is that these, you see biker gangs and stuff like that, even in good times when all this stuff is orderly and intact. You see that a little bit, but it's peripheral and it's small. And now all of a sudden we see those things starting to come out and really be much more prevalent, and where people were able to completely ignore their families and move to completely different areas of the country and never talk to each other and maybe exchange Christmas cards or something like that. And now suddenly people are starting to go, well, can I move in with you? Can we work this out? I'll make sure I have a sidearm with us while we drive to Costco to go shopping, so in case we're accosted by one of these self-organizing collectives that's out there, suddenly it costs us. You've got 5 or 6 people with guns who have your back and so on, and that's suddenly cropping up. That doesn't crop up unless you have collapse. So it's a sign of that the collapse is pushing along. So that's really where we are. We are at the verge of political collapse. I mean, we have rhetoric right now where they're saying, the Democrats will not admit defeat. They will not honor the results of the election, no matter what. And we have Trump laying out that he's not going to honor the results of the election, no matter what. So we have a fail. We can already know going into this that no matter how you vote, whether you vote by mail, whether you vote by absentee ballot, whether you go to the actual polls and vote in the normal way, no matter how you vote, it doesn't matter. We're going to have a failed election. It would take a bloody miracle or some serious cowardice on one side or the other for them to back down and concede the election. So we are at political impasse. We're about to have political collapse in this country. We're hearing retired generals openly plotting a coup against the civil authority. This is a complete breach of the Constitution. This is a complete failure of the Republican system of the United States of America. We are at the point of political collapse. All the factions are fracturing, and they are going into some level of confrontation with each other, if not open war. My point there in pointing all this out is just how immediate this is. We are talking about something that's going to transpire over the next several months to years. We don't know how fast it's going to go. We do know that when collapse, because of the whole parabolic curve, that when collapse comes, it tends to be very precipitous, and it tends to be right off. It's that whole adage from Wall Street is that bulls come up the stairs, bears go out the window. In other words, things grow fairly slowly, but when they fall, they really fall. And so when we get into the true collapse of this society, it will be fairly quick. When we look at the Soviet Union, there was a period of several years, 5, 6 years, where collapse developed, and collapse seemed fairly imminent or inevitable or likely for 5 or 6 years. But the actual transition from it's the Soviet Union to it's not the Soviet Union was approximately 2 weeks. And so there's very likelihood that some point here, the United States is going to also hit a point where, 2 weeks ago we were the United States, and now we are something different. Now, when that 2 weeks, approximately 2 weeks, 2 months, 2 days, to whatever transpires, I have no idea. It could be November, it could be January, it could be 4 years out yet. Maybe, for whatever reasons, the Democrats do back down, Trump is elected, and he gets his next 4 years, and there's continues to be terrible loggerheads and turmoil and social unrest and so on for another 4 years, and it's going to be the next election, either 2 years out or 4 years out, where the actual collapse is going to come. So, maybe we slip away from this collapse scenario that we're at in this moment for another 2 to 4 years. Maybe they can print enough money. Maybe they can distribute it effectively enough. Maybe they can, deal with these things. Maybe they can't. We really don't know. There's a whole lot of maybes that nobody can answer. We can say it's likely or unlikely, but we really don't know. But we are at that point where, if it doesn't happen now, it is going to happen, but maybe it happens 2 years out or 4 years out. But it's definitely going to happen. It is transpiring, and we're in that situation where the financial will collapse. It will take the commercial with it. It will take the political with it. We will be left with these self-organizing collectives if they can hold themselves together, and it very likely will reduce to families and so on. So there's a very good chance either you are right now encountering collapse and the perils of collapse, or you probably will do so within the next couple of years. Now, admittedly, if you're creative and industrious, right now can be a really boon time. Times of tragedy and times of chaos can be a real boom time for new ideas and new industries and new approaches and stuff like that. And so you might actually lift yourself up very high in the moment where everything else is falling down, which can be a two-edged sword, but it can be done. So, it might be worth it to, make use of this moment to try to prosper. In fact, I definitely would say that it would be. And that gives you perhaps some flexibility to get someplace where you probably can, sponsor a community, help to stabilize it, stuff, so on and so on. And in many cases, that's a path that I'm more or less trying to take myself. Whether it's successful or not, who knows? I mean, if things fall apart at this election, we're all kind of equally screwed. But the thing is that right now, as you are kicked out into, as you potentially fall out of society, as you fall out into a collapsed situation for whatever reason, there's some perils that you're going to be facing. There's 12 different things that people, at least 12 different things that people tend to not think about. And I want to kind of just run down the list. 12 perils of collapse that you don't necessarily think about. Number one is intelligence. And I'm not talking about the intelligence in your head, what you are intelligent about, what you know, though that certainly is relevant. It's about getting timely information about what's going on in your environment. Right now, like for instance, there's riots. There have been riots in within an hour's drive of where I'm sitting. And they haven't come here. They've tried to come here, and they have failed to come here yet. They may well come here yet. It may come here, it may not. But the thing is that, one of the things you need to know is like, well, where are they rioting? Where are they blocking traffic? Where are these fires? Where are the dangers? Where are the hazards? So if you have to bug out, if you have to move, if is the military coming? Is the government coming? Is the police coming? Is some armed gang coming? Where is everybody's territory? If all of a sudden we're having neighborhoods arm themselves and cordon themselves off so that they don't get attacked and so on, it's like what neighborhood is friendly and what neighborhood is not friendly. And this whole lay of the land can be of the utmost importance. And this is very typical of a collapse type scenario. It's typical of the formation of a communist government, and that's what certain factions are pushing, the formation of a communist government. And this is one of the ways they do it, is to reduce everybody into factions and then come in with the military and just sweep everybody up. And so they're trying to kind of promote this. But if you are not really paying attention to your environment, you're very likely to fall afoul of the fact that you don't know what's going on around you. Also, if you don't have good, solid information sources, you're very likely to fall of different things, not knowing that certain things are going to be a problem, not being aware that food is going to be an issue this winter, or that this financial thing is coming the way it is, or things like that. The more you are believing propaganda now, whether it be right side propaganda or left side propaganda, the more you're engaged in propaganda, the less your intelligence level is. You know, the information level is bad because people are lying to you. They're lying to you to manipulate you. Neither side is necessarily concerned about your personal well being. They're worried about maintaining their power structure. And, while the Trump side is probably a little more compassionate about you as an individual, ultimately, if you're going to rock the boat enough to kind of upset their agenda, you are just as negotiable as the other side. Where for the other side, if you're not on board, if you're not 100% on board, you're an absolute nothing, and you're bound for death. Like I said, socialist ideology is always and irrevocably genocidal. So it doesn't matter, if you are a walk away, or you're now just as bad as anybody else. And we've seen this in the rhetoric where everyone who isn't us is a Nazi, and anyone who is us but doesn't agree with us 100% is also a Nazi, and they're a plant, or they're a stooge, or they're a bot, or they're whatever. And so it doesn't matter whether you are whatever minority group you cling to. You're just as likely to be genocided as everybody else. So, this is not the side you want to see come to power in any way, shape, or form, just for your chance of survival. As their various Democrats have been saying, they've got Hellfire missiles, they've got nukes. What are you going to do with your little rifle? If that's their attitude, that's very obviously a genocidal attitude. This is not the side that you necessarily want to have out there in any level of power. But it's going to be very important that you really try to find solid information sources, which is really, really hard to do right now. And it may mean, having to set up a ham radio network where people actually pass information, having to set up, websites that are just, may even have to be on the dark web or something like that, unlisted websites or something like that, where people just pass the information to one another and maybe come together on some sort of a forum and provide some sort of a clearinghouse for information, or some sort of citizen journalism approach or something like that, is going to be extremely necessary just for your own survival's sake. And that is one of the biggest things that will actually get people killed. Bad intelligence is because you just bumble into peril. If we look at some place like Kosovo, and the breakup of Yugoslavia, and they talked about everything was cordoned off into neighborhoods, and if you were from one neighborhood and you walked into another neighborhood, there were snipers on the roofs and they just shot you because maybe you're looting, maybe you're looking to kill them, maybe you're violent, maybe you're whatever. They defended their territory. They didn't know who you are. They didn't know why you were coming, nor did they care. If they saw you, they shot you. This is a report of what it was like from somebody who lived there that I'm just quoting, that I'm just referencing. And so, we can definitely expect something very similar here, where people decide, I'm going to set up my little area and I'm going to defend it. Me and my neighbors are going to defend it. And if anyone comes walking in here, maybe we just open fire, because we're going to fire first and ask questions later. And in that case, you definitely need to know that. You don't want to just go bumbling in. You just don't want to go hieing off down some country road, because the odds of ambush or the odds of some sort of a defensive action getting you, it could be really, really detrimental. You could find that you and possibly your entire group is eliminated very quickly without having the right intelligence. We saw the same thing sort of happen in New Orleans after Katrina, where people tried to walk out of the city, and people in the suburbs had actually set up barricades and had guns and everything and opened fire on the people trying to flee the town, because they were worried that they were going to be looting and pillaging, and they didn't want them in their community, and so they'd actually put armed barricades on the bridges. Well, you kind of need to know that. If you think I can just walk out and you can't, and you go bumbling into gunfire, that could be the end of your day, end of your life. Next thing that is really going to get you in trouble is your relationships with your friends and your allies and your family. And what I mean there is, a lot of times with our families so spread out, is that if a crisis was to come in the next couple of months or whatever, say the power goes off, whatever, we get into a crisis. It becomes very odd. We hit one of those moments where everyone agrees now that it is a crisis and very possibly a collapse scenario. The power goes off, communications go down, and everybody is living by their own devices as best they can. We reach this point. A lot of people immediately are going, I've got to go rescue, my kids at college, if the college is open and so on. My kids at college, I've got to go rescue my kid who is 5, 6, 7, 800, 1,200, 2,000 miles away. I've got to drive all the way across the country and pick up my kid and drive 2,000 miles back to get my family all back together again. And I've heard this so many times that people have said this. Oh, my best buddy who's got my back and he lives in, a state 1,000 miles from where I am. So I'm going to hop in the car and drive 1,000 miles, or he's going to hop in the car and drive 1,000 miles, and then we're going to team up and everything like that. So your friends, your families, and your allies, this whole sort of milling behavior, which is a typical psychological stage that people go through when they're confronted with a disaster. They want to make contact with their friends and family. They want to mill. They want to share information, develop a plan, get together. Well, that doesn't work so well when you're thousands of miles apart from each other, or even hundreds of miles, even tens of miles. Even if someone is 50 or 60 miles away, maybe, if people are starting to shoot you if you happen through their neighborhood, and there's a lot of neighborhoods in between here and 50 miles away, you might as well be on the other side of the planet from each other. And so this becomes a real issue, is that this milling behavior that is very natural for people to go into, where they're going to want to gather together with their friends and family somewhere, is likely to get people killed. And it is something you're going to probably experience. It is something that is inevitable that people go through emotionally when these sorts of things and thing. You may want to say, we're all going to meet up at Cousin Sally's out in Nebraska, and Cousin Sally's like, no, you go get out of here. You manage to get there. You go early and it's safe, and you manage to get there, and then she's like either gone, or she's like, what I don't know what you all were thinking. Get on out of here. And so now what do you do? Now you're going to go back? You're going to go that 100 to 1,000 miles back through the same danger. Now it's escalating danger as the situation spirals out of control. You're unlikely to make it back. There's a fella I was interacting with up in Maine, and he was that way, and he's like, oh no, it's a dumb idea for anyone to do anything like that. But, the thing I have to do is I just need, and we're up in northern Maine, and he's like, I need to drive to Pittsburgh and pick up my kid and then bring him back. So this is like going through Boston, going through New York, or going around New York, going through, in a bunch of big cities, traveling a whole lot of the country. And that's the first thing I've got to do if things collapse. And then I'll come back here, bring them back here, and then we'll, be able to have each other's butts and protect each other. And obviously it's like, if that person drove away, the odds of ever seeing them come back again have got to be considered less than 1%. Probably considerably less than 1%. Essentially, a foregone conclusion, they're not coming back. But they felt that's what they had to do. Their kid was 700, 800 miles away, and damn it, they were going to bring him back. And before they could do anything else for survival, they had to bring their family, friends, and allies. Of course, also, if your family, friends, and allies are frickin' idiots, these are not necessarily the greatest people you want to survive with. Obviously, our families, friends, and allies are the groups that we look to. But if they are, anti-gun, they're not into hunting or trapping, they're not into farming or gardening, they're not into fishing, they're not into sailing, they're not into any sort of outdoor activities, they don't have any skills, they have chronically bad judgment, they have these different things going on. They can get you killed that way just because they've got stinking thinking. They got very bad thinking for the scenario. And of course, again, in a lot of disasters, we see that where somebody feels very much that they are an authority and they are the leader. And they are clueless. They're a clueless nitwit, and everything they do gets people hurt or killed. And yet they're quite still convinced 100% that they should be the leader. And of course, once finally there's a mutiny, if there's anybody left to mutiny, and they tell them, look, you can't be the leader, of course, then there's all kinds of an edge, and that this person then can't really be considered a trustworthy individual because they feel slighted because their leadership was rejected. So friends, families, and allies, there's all kinds of ways friends, family, and allies can potentially get your ass killed. As much as you need them, as much as you need friends, families, and allies, um, they're going to be going through the emotions of collapse. They're going to be going through a grieving process. They're going to be going through an adjustment period. They've lived all their lives in a society that doesn't that actually outlaws survival behavior and discourages it mightily. They're not going to adapt very easily. They're not going to adapt very well. And so you've got to be aware of that and either make allowances for it or make sure you have a more balanced group, or maybe you don't want to team up with you. If you know that's the case with your friends, families, and current allies, maybe you need to make some new ones. If you know that they're going to make bad decisions and somebody's going to insist on being the leader and they're a really bad leader and they shouldn't be the leader, things like that, maybe you want to think about somebody else to team up with who's not that way. So that is a major issue. Another one is your neighbors and the people who may be currently your enemies, narcissists. We're surrounded by narcissists. We live in a society that narcissism is held up as the example of how you should behave, and that means that about 90% of the population has a tendency to act like narcissists. It also means that people see narcissistic behavior as a sign of strength, and it's what they look for in an authority figure. It's what they look for in a politician. It's what they look for in a military leader. It's what they look for in a leader type person. And of course, narcissists they don't ever make anything work well. They will tell you they do, but they absolutely never make anything work well. They always destroy what they touch, and they always abuse everybody around them. They always take advantage. They never really deliver on their promises. So we've got a really bad situation here where certainly 90, if you happen to be an empathetic individual, even if you are one of the, empathetic individuals who's willing to do what it takes to protect your people, which is the ideal, those are good leaders potentially. Even if you're one of those people, you are surrounded by a lot of people who either are narcissists or look at narcissism as the correct and proper demonstration of behavior in the situation. People are all going to be saying that they should be the leader, that everyone should listen to them, everyone should follow them, everything should go their way, and they bring nothing to the table. And yet they'll be very aggressive, they will backstab. These are people who will, if betrayed or even outed as narcissists, they may very easily open the gates to your enemies to get revenge. They may, basically frack you or assassinate you. They may arrange for some sort of an accident. They may kill you. They may do all kinds of other things. Narcissistic people are not trustworthy people. And so we have 10% of the population that's genuinely narcissistic, and we have another 80% of the population that's actively looking at narcissism as an appropriate way to behave. This does not bode well for people's survival. And so if you are joining some sort of a survival group and so on, it helps to know what narcissism looks like. It helps to be sensitive to that. And that's the sort of thing that if you can avoid it, it would be a preference to do so. It would be very much a preference to avoid narcissistic behavior that may well be impossible. And so, the other thing is that perhaps you humor the narcissist until you can get rid of them, or something like that. You're going to have a strategy for dealing with people who are narcissistic. And this may include people who are at work or so on, and they'll see this as an opportunity where there's no law and order, so maybe they come to get their revenge because you insulted them or they never liked you or whatever, and so they actually come and intend to cause trouble simply because this is their opportunity to get revenge on you. So the narcissists that are currently in your life, the bullies, the thugs, the narrow-minded, self-important people, and so on, but also the codependent people who look at these people as the strong leader types. And that goes for this election too, where, you've got people like, what's her name? Nancy Pelosi and so on, whose recent apology, non-apology is very typical of a sociopath. She's outing herself through her behavior as a sociopath. as are many politicians. The vast majority of politicians have some sort of a narcissistic or sociopathic personality type. And I mean, that's pretty well established. It's actually considerably more than twice the rate of normal. It's quite high. Is that most everybody who runs for president, for instance, has at least narcissistic personality traits, if not is a raging narcissist or a sociopath or a psychopath. Again, I say we hold that up as the way things are supposed to be. And so no matter how much you are in love with any particular politician, the thing is that they all have at least narcissistic traits if they're not, in fact, an actual narcissist. And they cannot be trusted. So you are already potentially very strongly attached to somebody with narcissistic traits, and you're looking at that as an ideal that you aspire to personally, and that you would accept somebody like that as a leader. And that is a really bad strategy. That is a disastrous strategy. It's also going to cause a lot more war and confrontation than there needs to be. You know, that's going to be people fighting people for no damn good reason. So you really need to educate yourself on what narcissism looks like and how to avoid it and all that sort of stuff. You need to understand that, you know, the gentle power, the person who's willing to do the what needs to be done, but is willing to be compassionate and so on, they'll win out in the end. History tells us that, you know, it's not the most aggressive groups that win. When all things are equal, it's the groups that are aggressive but exercise moderation. They're the ones that win. They win people's hearts and minds. That they may be harsh, they may be cruel, they may be criminal, but they're fair. And those are the ones that have the longevity in a collapse sort of situation. On the other hand, they're also the ones that tend to be taken out by the narcissistic types. The people who are, you know, that whole you hit one of our guys, we put one of your guys in the hospital. You put one of our guys in the hospital, we put one of yours in the grave sort of mentality. Yes, you tend to win. You know, if you're willing to go to that level of violence, at any level of violence, you're always willing to up the ante, you tend to win. On the other hand, you have no stability, and so over the long run, you tend to fail. You know, not just tend to fail, you do fail. That approach absolutely fails. Whereas the moderate approach of, you know, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, which is not necessarily moderate or anything you want to live under, but that sort of an approach, when it's balanced and it's controlled violence wins hearts and minds. And people are okay with that. They see that as inherently fair, even if it's over the top. And so those groups have longevity. But if a person's willing to reach to any level of atrocity, they will tend to be whoever tends to be the most brutal when it comes to violence tends to win. So that's a real thing you need to be very aware about. So, not just a group about your group. You know, you don't want the people who are incapable of seeing danger. You don't want people who are incapable of rising to the level of violence that's required at the moment. But you want to be aware also. It's like our next door neighbors. Are they narcissists? Are they psychopaths? Are they sociopaths? Because then they may, be very effective at projecting violence on us, more effective than we're willing to counter or able to counter, in which case maybe some sort of a hasty retreat or some other strategy might be very important to adopt. So narcissism, that's something you really want to know about for so many reasons, because that's going to be a major factor in collapse, is because we are in a narcissistic society surrounded by narcissists. Boredom. Boredom and other emotions. If things, you don't have a job, you don't have prospects, you don't have a future, you've lost all your possessions, you've possibly lost family members, you're going to be grieving, you're going to be going through an adjustment period, you're going to be depressed. Even if you somehow manage to avoid all that, you're going to be bored. Right now entertainment is as simple as turning on the television, turning on the computer, or looking at your phone. You've got entertainment available to you 24/7, and however old you are, you've had that all of your life. And in a collapse scenario, that is very likely to just suddenly vanish, and you're going to go from more entertainment than you can ever possibly watch to essentially none at all, or very damn little. And this is going to be a major crisis for a lot of people. So even if you're capable of saying, yeah, hey, I can adapt, Yeah, but the people in your survival group, the people you're going to run into, they're not going to adapt very well. And this is going to become a major, major issue. It's going to become a major issue of morale, and it's going to become a major issue of motivation for people. And it's a point where somebody might do something stupid or treacherous just to get that entertainment fix. Um, so this is a real weak spot. It's an addiction. That everybody, or damn near everybody, 99% of the population are addicted to entertainment 24/7. And they're going to have to go cold turkey. That's going to have a really negative impact on people. And it's going to lead to some really bad decisions, and those bad decisions can potentially get a lot of people killed. So, you might want to think about that. You might want to psychologically start to separate yourself from entertainment gluts, and be able to function without entertainment. Start practicing living without that sort of constant glut of entertainment. I'm not saying you have to be a monk, but you want to lessen your dependence on constant entertainment, constant stimulus. I mean, this is one of the reasons people don't go into the country and don't like the country. City people don't like the country, is it feels profoundly unnatural to them. It doesn't have the traffic noise. It doesn't have the constant hum of the city. It doesn't have the hum of electric lights and machinery. It doesn't have sirens, and it has weird noises. The creatures make weird noises in the woods, or there's no noise at all. And it freaks people out. And I've seen this happen on many occasions where city people come out to the country and they can't sleep and they freak out. Well, it may well be that that level of quiet, that level of discomfort, if the power goes out, that may come to you. You may still be living in your city, but now suddenly it's dark and it's silent. And it's going to be a very unusual environment, and it's going to have a really serious negative emotional impact on people. And some people are going to go kind of crazy when they're exposed to that lack of stimulus. And in that craziness, they're going to have, they will make very bad decisions, very irrational decisions, very panicky, emotional decisions, and that can definitely get people killed. Bug out. A lot of people say, hey, things are coming along, so obviously you bug out. If you're going to bug out, you need to bug out early. You don't want to wait until it's obvious that it's time to bug out. You want to bug out early. People are right now bugging out. People are leaving California in droves. They're leaving Seattle and places like that. They're moving to other cities in many cases. Some are moving out to the country. Some are moving to their vacation cabin or wherever they can go. The thing is that if you bug out early, you're going to have to be ready to stay the long haul, because it may be a while. It may be another 4 years before the real collapse comes. And if you're bugging out right now, if you're bugging out to another city, you may find that that city has just as much trouble as any other city. And then you may have to bug out to another. How many cities you're going to go to. If you bug out to the country, you may find that your power's cut off, your supplies are cut off, your resources are cut off, and you're just left alone living out in the country. And you may find that if you don't have the tools and tactics and knowledge and skill to live out in the country with really no inputs, you may find that you're stuck having to come back in trying to find help after a point where you don't want to be anywhere near the city. So there's a lot of things where in a disaster, a lot of people think that everyone's going to flood out from the cities and go across the countryside, and that's absolutely not what happens. Like I said, people tend to put up armed barricades at the bridges and stuff, and they hold you in the city because they don't want you moving through their area. So even those people that you know and you currently work with and interact with just in the suburbs, just outside your area, may be shooting at you as you try to leave. And they may be, doing horrible things to try to keep you from leaving. So you may not be able to leave. And even if you are able to leave, where are you going to go? How far do you have to go? And so on. If you're going to go, there's the whole issue of you better be able to stay. You better be prepared to doing whatever needs to be done to stay for the long term. And if you haven't been practicing cooking, harvesting your own food, preserving your own food, all these different things, cutting your own firewood for fires and all this sort of stuff, getting your own water, if you haven't kind of practiced that, if you haven't figured out how to live that sort of a quiet, tranquil, isolated sort of existence, you're going to have a really, really hard time. It's not that, bug outs, an ill-timed bug out can get you killed. So, like I said, if you're going to go, you need to go early. Because if you wait till too late, there's a very good chance you're not going to make it. But at the same time, even if you go, even if you succeed in going, then when you get there, you may find that it's not particularly better than if you'd stayed. And so it makes a really, really big quandary. Generally speaking, people who've been through collapse scenarios all agree that you really don't want to be in the city. Now, in Russia, the Soviet Union collapse, that was kind of backwards because it was harder to live in the country because there was a unique situation there where because 90% of people kept a garden and 90% of the food in the Soviet Union came from people's small gardens, there was food everywhere. But there was only consumer goods in the cities. So the people in the country had the food, but they didn't have any kind of consumer goods. People in the city had food, and they also got the consumer goods. So in the case of the Soviet collapse, actually being in the cities was a preference. But in other places, actually being in the city sucks because you don't have food and you may or may not have consumer goods and you have urban fighting over territory and stuff like that. Out in the country, you have what you can make for yourself. And you have potentially territory fights and so on like that too. You don't necessarily get away from that. You're going to have that out in the country, so it's going to be of a different character than it would be in the city. So bug out, if you're thinking about bugging out, you got to think about a lot of things, and you got to think about it carefully, and you got to think about, if you're going to do it, you either going to have to survive for a long time until everything starts to quiet down and bug out at that time, so you better have the resources to survive, which can be a very dangerous strategy because if people know you have the resources, you become a target, or you want to bug out early, and you don't, any other strategy is a very dangerous strategy, but no, there's no good strategy there. You basically need to just kind of follow your nose to some degree. It's like, how are you going to get what you need to get to survive? If you can't get in the city, you need to think of somewhere else you can get it. There's a lot of people who are, they're bugging out, but like I said, so you bug out in New York City and you move to Miami. Yeah, well, Miami's not necessarily any better than New York City as far as self-sufficiency goes. Or you move to, Pittsburgh or something like that. They're not necessarily any better for self-sufficiency than New York City is. Pittsburgh, granted, is at least closer to rural areas where survival might be possible. But generally speaking, it's not any better than being in New York City. So you haven't improved your situation any. And it's worth it to very much think about that very hard. It's also worth it to think about where are the nuclear power plants, because if we have a power grid down situation, EMP situation, and so on, most of those nuclear power plants are going to melt down because they can't be maintained. And you can figure out 40-mile radius around any nuclear power plant is a no-go area. It's too high in radiation. So, it would be a good idea to figure out where nuclear power plants are and stay at least 40 miles away from a nuclear power plant. And make sure that you don't have to go through such an area to get to your bug out location. Attitude and flexibility. This is a real killer. 99 people say 90% of everything is attitude, and they're really right. And the thing is that you're going to have this whole situation is going to be an upheaval to everybody's life. None of us know exactly what to expect. None of us are emotionally prepared to have this transition occur to us. And how you look at that, whether you're willing to look at it as a intriguing adventure, or you're willing to be open-minded to possibilities. It's like, maybe you don't like the ocean or the beach or whatever like that. But like I said, best survival is probably going to be relying on the oceans for fish and such. That is probably the most likely way you're going to be able to feed yourself. It's not going to be easy, but it's the most likely way. So you may find that, you really like the mountains, you really like the forest, you really like a small cabin, a remote cabin or something like that. That may not be a very good strategy. And you may at some point have to say, it's like, well, I just need to go where survival is possible. And I don't like being there. I'm not comfortable there. But you know what? That's where survival is possible. Or the same thing with foods and so on. It's like, this is a food I don't like. Well, but if that's the food there is, you're going to have to find it within yourself to be adaptive. A lot of people can't, and of course that leads to a lot of death. There's situations where people had food and they just didn't like it and they starved to death rather than eat the food that they had because they didn't have that flexibility to adapt to the situation they found themselves in. That does happen. That's an emotional issue. That's kind of, again, that coming down is that you're addicted to a certain standard of food and a certain standard of living, and you're not willing to change, and you are also non-flexible. And you maybe have a real arrogance about a personal status or standing and so on, and you're not willing to be flexible about it. That definitely 100% can get you killed. So that's really a thing to work on, is just try to start opening your mind. Number 7, fire. Fire, of course, is an important tool. It's important to know how to light a fire. It's important to know how to light a fire without matches. Bow drill technique is not, it's not easy, but it's not particularly difficult either. Flint and steel is not easy, but it's not particularly difficult either. You can learn them all in, about 45 minutes or as little as 15 minutes sitting with a skilled instructor. You can have the basics of how to get it done. So fire is not necessarily that difficult. The thing about fire is managing fire. If we're going back into a collapse scenario, we're going back into a world that has an intimate relationship with fire, in so much as that people's ability to keep warm and people's ability to eat is going to be very dependent upon their ability to light a fire and maintain a fire. And nobody's skilled on that anymore. Nobody knows that stuff. So even if you have a wood stove, there's so many people who don't know when or how to clean a wood stove's chimney, and they get a chimney fire. And that burns down their house, and now they're in a big deal of trouble. They're dumb, and they put candles in the house unattended while they sleep, either for warmth or for light, and carbon monoxide kills them. Or they put in a brazier of hot coals in their house and forget to open a window or anything. Carbon dioxide or carbon monoxide kills them. Or it lights their house on fire or something like that. Think about the people who live around you and imagine every single one of them trying to light a fire every single day, possibly 2 or 3 times a day if they're not smart enough to keep one going. And think about how many trees are around you and how fast those are going to disappear if everyone wants to light a fire. And then think about your neighbors and how smart and conscientious are they? How likely is it that one of them is going to have either an idiot moment or is just going to have an accident and it's going to catch their house on fire and potentially then every other house around, because the fire department may not be coming. And so a fire in one house may spread to 100 other houses, especially if there's a wind or something. So, considerations about fire and fire safety and how to work with fire is really important. How to properly build a fire, how to keep, smoke down to a minimum, the proper aging of wood, all these different things. It's not just about being able to light a fire. It's much more important than that. It's, what woods spark. Do you know that you don't put white cedar on a fire because it throws sparks, or black locust or mesquite? They all throw sparks, and there's other plants that do too. And so that's going to be throwing sparks, and at certain times of the year, that's going to start a fire. In the spring, when it's dry and it's a fire season in the early spring, you've got a fire that's throwing sparks. You're going to have a fire, and then that can get out of control, and it can burn your whole community out of wherever you are. So that's going to become a major issue. Fire was a major issue to our ancestors, and we take it really quite for granted because of modern building techniques and because we got central heating and stuff. We don't have to think about fire. It's taken care of. That's not necessarily going to be the case, and so you're going to have all this sort of big problems with fire coming forward. Clothes. Clothes are a huge one. Right now, the clothes you're wearing almost certainly will get you killed. Most of the clothes that are in your closet will probably get you killed. If you're wearing primarily cotton, which most people do, cotton is referred to as death cloth. If you get damp in cotton, you lose body heat 5 times faster than you would being naked. And that will kill you. And so it's very important to have the appropriate clothes and other things to keep your body temperature stable. So if you have the wherewithal at all, right now would be a really good time to start acquiring at least one suit of clothing that would be appropriate for the outdoors. Would be something like wool or polyester. Polyester works okay, especially as an outer shell garment. Do research into what makes it a good, decent set of clothing for living in the outdoors. And there's different things you can get. Some are very easy to get. Some are more hard. Some are very cheap. Some are very expensive. But you want to start getting your clothes stowed away because, quite frankly, if you're forced to live as a homeless person, or if you're forced to travel on foot, or if you're forced to be out in the wilds and in nature more than you're used to, but you're wearing clothes of an office worker or a city person, those clothes will potentially kill you. Or at least they vastly increase your odds of being killed. And so you're really going to want to adjust what you wear and how you wear it, and what you think of about things when you think about clothes. And so that might be something to really put some effort into now while you can still do something about it. Hygiene and bugs. Of course, obviously, hygiene becomes a major issue. Getting washed is much, much harder. Keeping clean is much, much harder. What are you going to do with your poop? And so on like that becomes a major issue. But even if you are aware of how to run a composting toilet, and even if you're aware how to keep things clean, and you've got bug nets and stuff and so on, there is the issue that if there's anybody within 8 miles of you who is not practicing good hygiene, flies can travel up to 8 miles. So they can be landing on somebody's poop pile down, 2, 3, 4, 5 miles away, and then they can fly as far as your house to land on your food, and or in your water, or on your pots and pans and stuff like that, and spread disease. So it becomes a real issue. Hygiene is very, very important. Hygiene, how you're going to approach hygiene, maintaining hygiene, but also watching out for bugs and cross contamination. Because no matter how good you are, understand there's going to be people pooping in the creeks because they're used to pooping into water. They're used to the water flushing their crap away. And so even though the creeks are going to be the primary source for people to get water, admittedly, it's not very clean water. Hopefully you have a filter device or something to help to clean the water. But the creeks are going to be primarily places where people are going to get water. And it's going to be a place where people go to poop. And they're going to pee in the creeks, and they're going to shit in the creeks. And there's going to be all kinds of contamination in the creeks, and that's going to spread all kinds of disease. And this is very typical. You see this all over the world. So, you definitely want to have some sort of a water filter. You're going to definitely want to have a hygiene strategy, because disease and the spread of disease is going to be a major killer. It can kill you faster than starvation will. Medical. Obviously, yes, if you have a long-lasting condition or something like that, if you are medically dependent, if you need dialysis, if you need constant medical care, you're in quite a way. Some of those conditions, you might find that a change in diet and a change in lifestyle will make them just simply vanish on you. And so you actually may expect to die, and you just don't die. Because suddenly now eating a more natural wild diet and having a different lifestyle means that actually you get better. Other people, of course, yes, without medical help, you may not make it. But what I mean by medical is simple stuff. Cutting yourself, if you're cooking and you're not used to cooking, if you're, doing any sort of thing, cutting trees, cutting limbs, working with a chainsaw, working with a saw, working with an axe, working with, trying to butcher a fish or a deer or a rabbit or something like that, and whether you're used to it or not, cuts. Deep cuts are common, burns are common, sprains are common, all kinds of different things. And if you don't, you need to have better than first aid knowledge. Nowadays first aid knowledge is stabilize the patient, get them to the hospital. That's pretty much ubiquitously what they say. And you're going to want to actually have a little bit more knowledge than that, because the hospital just simply may not be available. And so it's the little things, it's the lifestyle change things, and it's the dumb accidents, getting overheated, staying warm enough, getting a mild fever, things like that. Those are going to be major issues. And there's a lot of strategies, home remedy strategies that I shared a video sometime back about ditch medicine. It's got some stuff in there, and there's so many other strategies you can do. As you're learning home remedy techniques, though, remember that, things like, put aloe on a burn. Well, you better be growing your own aloe then, because you're not going to be able to go to the store and get a bunch of aloe juice. Oh, you use lavender essential oil. Only if you can steam distill lavender essential oil for yourself. Otherwise, you're going to run out and you can't depend on that. So you want to use stuff that you know is local to your area, that is readily available to you, and you want to start knowing these things, especially cuts, burns, sprains, broken bones, and heat distress, environmental distress, things like that are the most common injuries. So you at least want to know how to handle those. Those can definitely kill people. They kill them really quick, and they're really really common. Pets. Pets are a big one. What are you going to do with your pets? You got to feed them. You got to take care of their waste along with everybody else's waste. Do you turn them loose? Do you lock them in your house and allow them to starve? What are you going to do? You're going to eat them? Can you bring yourself? I mean, there's a lot of people who raise rabbits or chickens or whatever for food and just simply find that they can't butcher them. And those aren't pets. That's not something that you're holding and cuddling while you sleep. That's something that's out in the barn or whatever, and people find that they just can't do it. How much more so would it be difficult to, I hear a lot of people say, oh, I'll just eat my pets. Well, maybe. So there's a real problem with pets. Is number one, on the one hand, that puts a real drag on you, and your survival is imperiled by having pets on one hand. But what's your strategy? On the other hand, things like dogs can actually be an early warning system. Of course, traditionally have been used with one. If you have hunting dogs or somebody who's trained, they can help you to hunt and be more effective in food getting. Goats and things like that. Horses obviously have their roles, so some of the livestock has obvious clear roles that would definitely help you if you can maintain them. And that's going to be a real challenge. There's the whole issue of, a horse needs about 8 acres. Do you have 8 acres? That's per horse. So if you've got 4 or 5 horses, if you got 5 horses, you need 40 acres of pasture to maintain a horse. What about a cow? What about these different things? These can be great boons for you, but these can also be real drags on you. And one of the big ones are, cats and exotic pets really don't help in any real well. I mean, yes, cats potentially catch mice and all, and it helps to keep disease down to some extent. But if your cats aren't mousers and they're not familiar with being mousers and they're not able to maintain their own well-being doing that, that's a real question how useful your cat is. It's a real question how useful your dog is. At the same time, recognize people are going to be letting their animals go. They won't be able to take care of them, and they can't bring themselves to kill them, and they can't bring themselves to eat them, and they don't feel comfortable locking them up and leaving them to die. And so they're going to leave them out. They're going to turn them out to the go wild. And this happens all over the world. And then you have all kinds of feral dogs and cats. And of course, both present their real problem in that, feral dogs will eventually become packs of feral dogs. They will become massive predator packs of potentially up to 100 or more dogs. And, you don't need more than one dog to give you a bad day. And 2 or 3 dogs take down most any person. And you could potentially see packs of 100 dogs running around attacking people. So this is going to be a real thing. So even if you don't have an animal, you got to think about everyone else's pet that's all around you. Those pets are going to become, a part of a dangerous part of your environment. For cats, the cats probably won't attack you, probably won't bother you, but they're taking all the small game. They're killing the mice, and they're killing the rats, and the rabbits, and the squirrels, and things that actually make up the major staple of your diet. That if you're trapping and you're trying to get food from the environment, most of the things you're eating are going to be mice and rats and squirrels and muskrats and rabbits and things like that. Well, what do you think the cats are killing? So if you got massive packs of feral cats running around, you can be sure that all that basic staple food, it's gone. So that's a major issue. And then what do you do with the cats? So, how we're going to deal with our pets. And of course, there's the whole issues about things being let out of, people who kept exotic pets and possibly even zoos letting out their animals or having their animals be let out. And they're suddenly roaming the countryside, and you run afoul of a gorilla or an elephant or something like that. This is going to be a problem, and it's something. What are you going to do about that? What are you going to do about your own pets, and what are you going to do about feral pets that you run into? And lastly, light. The thing is that you're used to having light. I mean, right now, as I'm recording this, it's probably like 3 in the morning or something like that. Light's on. I'm used to having light. I'm used to being up at night. I'm used to having light. You're used to having light. You're used to being able to turn on the light and move around your house fairly safely. You're used to having light available on demand with no real danger involved. And, if the power goes out, you're not going to have that. If you can't afford to pay for the power, you're not going to have that. If you don't know how to make candles, you're not going to have that. Yeah, even if you know how to make candles, you're going to realize that they're really valuable because they're kind of hard to make. And I mean, they're not hard to make, but getting all the equipment to make them, getting the fuel, getting the wicks, and everything like that can be a little challenging from nature. And so they have a great deal of value. So you don't necessarily burn them just cause. You spare them, you save them. As much as you possibly can. So maybe now all of a sudden you don't do the sorts of things you're used to doing. And you're going to have to get used to dealing with darkness. There's also the aspect of you're used to light and you're turning on lights and it tells everybody where you are. So if you have confrontation between yourselves and some other group, or you have groups wandering around looking for people to potentially be victims. They see your fire, they see your candle, they see your flashlight, they see your solar-powered light, they see whatever, and that's a beacon to them that there's something there worth checking out. And that's going to attract all kinds of attention. So it's really worth it to kind of consider, what are you going to do about light? What are you going to do about your addiction to having light? So those are just 12 things that just came to my mind that people hardly ever talk about. The issue of intelligence almost never comes up, and it's probably one of the most important things. Everyone talks about their friends and families. They don't realize just how vulnerable friends and families make you. You need them, but they make you vulnerable, and you have to be aware of that, and you have to allow for that. Nobody talks about narcissists. Nobody talks about the boredom and what's going to happen, especially kids. Kids who are so used to being entertained all the time. What are they going to do when suddenly they're bored as hell? What kind of trouble do kids get into when they're bored? They're already going to have all kinds of other emotions, all sorts of grief and depression and everything like that they have to deal with, and then they're going to be bored on top of that. Bugging out may or may not be an effective strategy. Attitude, you got to have flexibility. If you're going to have any chance to get through this, you want to have flexibility. If your attitude is one of depression and negativity already, this is not going to improve your attitude in any way. And that's going to, number one, nobody's going to want to be around you, and you absolutely are going to depend on other people for survival. But number two is that you're not going to have the energy and the enthusiasm to go do what you need to do to make life better. Fire is a major hazard, humongous hazard, and it's all about what do different woods burn like? How do you burn them safely? How do you keep from setting yourself on fire? How do you keep from getting carbon monoxide poisoning? All the different fire management issues are major, major issues. What are you going to do if somebody sets the forest on fire? Right now, there's all these fires going on all over the place in the West. What happens if somebody lights a fire near your house and suddenly there's a rolling fire, an out-of-control wildfire that's ripping through your neighborhood? What's your strategy? These are things worthy of thinking about. Clothing. Cotton kills. Cotton kills. So you want to start thinking in terms of other types of clothing. Clothing that actually is suitable for a more outdoor type life. Hygiene is going to be a major issue. Not just your hygiene, but the hygiene of everybody around you for at least 8 miles in any direction. And what are they doing? And are they crapping in your stream and your water supply? What about bugs flying in from potentially 8 miles away, spreading disease? What is your strategy to deal with that? Basic, simple things, cuts, infections, fevers. How are you going to how are you going to deal with that sort of the simple, common stuff? Because a lot of people are going to die that way. What are you going to do about your pets? Are they going to help you, or are they not going to help you? If they're not going to help you, what's your strategy? What is your strategy with dealing with everyone else's pets who have been turned out in the countryside? And how are you going to deal with light, with illumination? You are used to light, and everyone else is used to light, and light is going to attract attention. So what is your strategy, about dealing with light? Maybe it's a good time to get a little bit familiar and comfortable with the darkness. So anyways, there's a list of 12 things that you may not have thought about. And most of those are things you can do something about right now. I mean, I bring them up not because they're, horrible, negative, depressing things, but it's things where if you put some serious thought into them, you can actually make it easier on yourself. You can do things right now. Some of it involves acquiring, stuff like clothing, appropriate clothing. Some of it is just changing your attitude, just thinking about it. And there's things you can do right now that when the collapse occurs, even if it's 4, 5, 6, 10 years out in the future, when the collapse occurs, the fact that you've even spent any time thinking about it at all is going to make things so much easier on you. And there's that saying is that it's not, you don't have to be the fastest camper when the bear comes into the campground. You just have to be faster than the slowest camper. And that is funny, but because somewhat nasty sort of thing to say. But there's a lot of truth in that. Is that you don't necessarily have to be the most fit. You don't have to be the youngest. You don't have to be the smartest. You don't have to be the most violent. You don't have to do any of these things. You just want to make sure you're not the slowest. And if you spend some time thinking about these things now, these issues that I've brought up, and you go do a little research into how people have managed to deal with them in the past and how they deal with them now. I mean, there's a certain benefit in this. So much of the sort of the LARPing and cosplays people have actually looked into. It's like, oh, what's a rush light? How a rush light works. Well, yeah, there's people now who know how to make rush lights, and you might even be able to learn from them how to make rush lights, and so you might be able to do that, or you might figure out how to make candles because there's people do it as a hobby. And so in many ways, there's more information about this stuff available now than there was 20 years ago when I started looking into these issues myself 20 some odd years ago. A lot of the information was extremely hard to come by, and is the fruits of labor of other people who were doing the same stuff at the same time I was doing it, who have found information and they've been able to present it. And that's why the information now is actually available, because it was hidden in some rare book that nobody had read in 50 years, and somebody went out and found it. And now they're passing that information along. So the information is available. In some cases, they trial and error. They figured it out by trial and error. Refigured it out. That's kind of how bow drill kind of came back into a thing. It's somebody kind of figured it out by trial and error. And now it's common knowledge how to do bow drill. 20, 25 years ago, nobody knew how to do a bow drill. Now a lot of people know how to do a bow drill. So, there is something to be taken advantage of there. The fact that there are so many people who have engaged in thinking about these things and doing something about them. There's so much, and it's so easy to learn. You can just go on, another YouTube, just do a YouTube search right now and find answers to a lot of these issues that I brought up. There are answers. And even if you have a so-so answer, it's better than having no answer at all. So anything you do, it's just kind of like, what do you do if somebody jumps out of a dark alley and points a gun at you? You may not have a good answer, but at least if you have an answer, you're not going to freeze. You're going to greatly enhance your chances of survival if you have some kind of an answer and you take some kind of an action. It might not be perfect. It might not work out. But, freezing is just a strategy you can't afford. So anytime you spend thinking about it, if you take an action, it is well known about survival. It's whether we're talking about martial arts, self-defense, or whether we are talking about survival strategies and people who get into survival situations. Those who take actions have a tendency to survive. Those who hesitate or refuse to take actions tend to die. So I bring these things up so you have time to think about how you might take an action. Because as long as you take an action, even if it's a so-so action, if you're taking action, you're increasing your chances of survival. If you don't know and you don't act, you're greatly increasing your chances of not surviving. So it's worth bringing up.